It's good to see you here this afternoon/evening. My name is John Schmidt, and I'm the artist in residence here at General Theological Seminary. If you didn't know, that is where you are today. You're at a seminary campus, and it is my joy on behalf of the seminary to welcome you and to our campus and into our sanctuary and chapel today. It's great to see so many of you here, and we hope you'll enjoy your time with us this afternoon. We have a really great program for you. It's an honor to welcome Dr. Maria Fee as our guest speaker this afternoon. And I want to take a moment, just a brief moment, I'd be remiss not to say a big thank you to Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts, specifically Tyler and Lisa and Julie, who's buzzing about back there. We're just so grateful for the three of you, and the seminary is really looking forward to a future partnering with you guys. It's been so much fun to work together, and we're really glad this has happened today, and we look forward to more events like this in the future. With that being said, let's get our show on the road this evening. It's my joy and privilege to introduce to you the Executive Director for Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts, Tyler Rowlands. If you would give me a warm welcome with a round of applause for him as he comes forward.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. I'm so grateful to John and to Dean Michael and everyone at the seminary for hosting us. And I don't know, for me, this is just a very special place. My gallery used to be just a block from here, and I've walked by here many times over, I guess, a 10-year period. And finally, I realized you could come in. They're very welcoming. And so I used to come to this chapel to kind of meditate and think about things, particularly this connection between art and spirituality right here in the middle of the Chelsea Art District. It's incredible to have this literally oasis of green and of a sacred space. Actually, some of my meditations here, I think, really helped sort of gestate this foundation. Having been involved with the contemporary art world for many years, I know there are many different lenses for looking at art. We can talk about the political or the aesthetic or the personal identity issues, all these different lenses that we use. Some are more in fashion than others at different moments of history. So I really felt that for me, I felt the core of this art and contemporary life connection is really a more soulful one, a sense that the spiritual is really what connects us, not only to art itself, but to other people and by extension to something beyond our everyday lives. So I think meeting in a space like this, it just has a kind of aura about it that reminds us we're not in a kind of sterile environment. We're in one that kind of resonates with history and with many generations of people thinking about the spirit and what unites us, also in a context of beauty and artistic creation and contemplation. So really the mission of FSA, the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts, is quite a simple one. It's really just to foster connections between contemporary art and the world of spirituality and faith, religion, all these different terms that are kind of part of a continuum of our relationship with something kind of beyond ourselves, beyond our immediate physical environment. So it's quite exciting to kind of kick off our New York City programming here, and I hope this will be the beginning of a very fruitful partnership. We have three different aspects of the foundation. One is a residency program in Charleston, South Carolina, which brings artists to engage in their own work and also link with the community. Two of our wonderful artists are here. I hope some of you got to meet with them, Amina and Meg. And then the other part is our website. I really invite you to check out fsa.art, which we have developed over the course of the past year and a half with new programming as well as highlighting the work of many different people in different fields. So the other aspect is having programming here in New York. So I'm going to pass the baton to Lisa Amadi, who's our Director of Programming. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I'm clutching in my hands a little information and donation form. We would love to have you as a part of our community, whether that's joining our mailing list or if you'd like to contribute. We do not charge for these events and would really welcome and be very grateful for any support that you might be able to offer. So I'll pass it on to Lisa.
Hello. I'm just taking a second to take in your presence. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much for coming out in this first very cold day in New York as we kick off our first Inspired Brunch. We hope to have many, not only here, but inshallah in other sacred spaces around the city, and hopefully also in other parts of the world at some point. Tyler has already shared with you the mission and our programs. I just wanted to share the mission from my personal perspective, just because just a minute ago I shared it with one of our incredible visionaries, an individual that I admire so much for her work in connecting spirituality and sort of from the scientific arena. And as I was acknowledging her, she asked me what inspired me and why I'm here. And I told her that I fell in love with art. And then I realized I actually fall in love with people. And then I realized actually I fall in love with spirits that are inside people. And then I realized actually I want to be the facilitator of beautiful spirits and what they channel, their creativity, which comes from the source, from the divine. It's connected whether they know it or not. And I always appreciate when I have these very heartfelt, deep conversations with artists and creatives when they recognize how important their work is, and that it actually is beyond just their personal endeavor, but something that really creates beauty and brings light to the world. So on that note, I want to acknowledge the General Theological Seminary for hosting this program. It's just an incredible dream. Just a year ago, Tyler and I had our photo shoot here for FSA, and I was just dreaming that we could do something here, and here it is a year later. It has happened, and I had no idea it would. I wanted to specifically thank Dean Michael, who has basically, dived in, and he's not here today, but we're here with him. His spirit is here with us. Also, thank you, John, for the welcome. I wanted to let you know that Theaster Gates, who we are surrounding this program around his work, has sent his best wishes and regrets that he couldn't join our program. He is incredibly honored and pleased that we're having this discussion around that aspect of his practice, and so he's also here with us in spirit. He just opened a magnificent 3-story exhibition at the new museum, which I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to please go and see it. It is absolutely full of light and insight. And on that note, I want to acknowledge our guest of honor for today, whose work we're celebrating, Dr. Maria Fee, who I believe as the individual who has contemplated the work of Theaster Gates in the context of spirituality, it's just such a pleasure for us to introduce her and share her knowledge and her passion with all of you and with the world. She will share a bit about her book, and you probably will get a sense of it through her presentation. But I just wanted to quickly read you her bio. Maria Fee is an artist, theologian, educator. Her visual art explores ideas of fragmentation and cultural mixing, alienation, and hospitality. As an adjunct seminary professor, she applies art-based methodologies to such theological courses as the visual arts and the Christian, word and sacrament, and capstone thesis theology and art. Current projects include event programming and policymaking for the fledgling Hispanic Summer Program, Alumni Network, and studio work for an upcoming art installation in Seattle. Maria holds an MFA in painting and an MA in theological studies and a PhD in theology and culture. I was going to read also about Theaster Gates. His resume is incredibly long. You will get a sense of his work from Maria's presentation, but I just wanted to read you a short, very brief bio. Theaster Gates has incubated new models for artistic creation, social transformation, and building legacies, traversing a vast array of methodologies encompassing sculpture, performance, and archives. He explores concepts of value and economy, as well as spiritual and material exchange, as they perform in charged social contexts. That's from the website of the Gagosian Gallery. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
Okay. Sorry. GTS. This space is such a testimony to the importance of locality and place in regards to spiritual formation. So thank you, and thank you for choosing this space. I want to thank FSA because for this invitation. I am so honored, but I'm not only honored for the speaking, this ability to geek out on Theaster Gates, but to be invited into a community that cares deeply about our spiritual side as human beings, and in connection to the love I have for contemporary art, and being a wonderful conduit towards that spiritual formation. So, thank you also, my gosh, for reading that Theaster Gates bio, because I'm so glad I don't have to do it. That was so wonderful. So I'm coming to the subject matter of Gates's work more from thinking more about his persona as a monk. And so because I really want to relate how his work really revolves around this idea of spiritual formation, not just for himself, but how he creates the spaces so that the people that he collaborates with and also the audience have the opportunity to also acknowledge that part of them. Okay, so I come to this then not from a historical or critical art critical perspective. I look at Gates more from an artist's point of view, having made art for a lot of years, and also from a theological point of view. So let me unpack theology and what I'd be, my standpoint on that and how I've been formed theologically. So I'm a Protestant Christian who's worked and studied in evangelical institutions and has been informed by a lot of Reformed theology. And then I started doing dissertation work, and Gates became my subject. So through Gates, that opened up my perspective, my theological perspective, even wider to begin to look into liberation theologies, what we call contextual theologies. So liberation theologies, Gates, by looking at the Black church and Black liberation theologies, I found a way back home to my own background, which my parents are Cuban, and so I also began to look into Hispanic Latino theologies. Okay, so that's my background. So for instance, when I look at a picture like this of Gates, and he has a music ensemble called the Black Monks of Mississippi, and they typically go into spaces, and this is a space called St. Lawrence Church in Gates's neighborhood of Chicago that has been abandoned, and they go in and they perform in it. When I look at this as an artist, I think, oh yeah, artists like to go into weird spaces like that have been neglected, right? And they like to take up residence in there, and they like to transform that space. They see the potentiality of that space. But even so, those kind of spaces that speak of possibilities also ignite the creative capacity. So even artists who are working in these types of spaces become even more creative because they're hooked into this imaginary of what can be. So that's how I interpret something like this as an artist. Now, theological hat, put that on. When I look at this, I'm been inculcated by a biblical world. And so I think of this as an Ezekiel moment. The prophet Ezekiel was asked by God to go up and overlook this valley of dry bones. And he calls Ezekiel to say, prophesize to the dead bones, to the dry bones, and tell them that I'm going to breathe life in them, back into them, and reanimate them. Wow. This is the type of work that Theaster Gates does. And this is my definition of spiritual. God's breath in Hebrew is ruach. We see it in Genesis as the breath of God animates the human. And so together with the spirit, the ruach, the breath, gives life, and it's all about animating or reanimating, and it's all about breathing life back into something. That, for me, is spirituality, and that is imprinted all over what Gates does. Whether he calls it spiritual or not, this is what I see is happening in his work. This is the biggest example is the piece that he's most known for, which is the Dorchester projects. And thank you that I don't have to go through a long explanation of Gates. Gates now studied urban planning. Throughout the Dorchester projects, the medium becomes real estate. Gates also studies ceramics, and he also studied religion, world religions, African religions. So all these three discourses are threaded throughout all of his work. And so let me just go through really fast the Dorchester projects, where when he got a job with the University of Chicago, he bought the first property, which is a candy store that was a former candy store, and then that's art. Then he bought the second one. This is the third one, which became the first iteration of the Black Cinema House. All these spaces became, he lived in them, but he also was studio, and he would invite other artists to come in and live and work, and then he would invite his neighbors, and then they would have parties, and they would have all this action for his friends and for his neighbors, and it's a way of also for him to not leave the neighborhood, but still be fed culturally through art. And so he also, along with the city, renovated a city housing complex in the middle of which he gutted out 4 apartments and created a studio for the residents and for the neighborhood. So there's a springboard floor, so dance happens in there. But this is also the largest of the properties, which he bought this building for $1 from the city. And there's a really great story. Ask me in the Q&A about how he got money to renovate this building. So this place was abandoned for about 2 decades. So there was very little that he could he reuses the materials of the places that he buys, and he makes things out of them, and he sells them in the market. He's also a collector of things. And so, yeah, she's like, yeah, he is. And so he is the steward. The Stony Island Arts Bank has exhibitions, has musical performance, but it also is the receptacle for all of his collections. And so he owns, or he stewards, actually the John H. Johnson's publishing library, so that these are the books that the writers of Ebony and Jet would use for resource. He also takes care of the banker Edward J. Williams' collection that he and his wife amassed of objects that are out there in the antique markets that kind of show Black people in very typical and derogatory ways. So he is also the keeper of that. And then he also owns DJ Frankie Knuckles' album collection. So if there might be one day that you go in there and, they're spinning those records. Gates, in many ways, breathed life into these abandoned buildings, reinstituted these archival things for research. And so basically what he's doing, and he's bringing life back into the south side of Chicago, not just for himself, but for his neighbors. And at the same time, he's investing in archiving Black culture. Love it. So exciting. So what I want to do now is kind of paint a family portrait of Gates and his family, his background. And I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it through my interpretation of what these materials, these visual tropes that he constantly uses, that keeps on getting recycled in his work. And so, so that's what I'm going to do next. So, of course, clay as a potter has a lot of meaning in his work. And clay, that takes up two forms. One is the pottery, he's a potter, and the other is the bricks, manufacturer of bricks. And so here we have the labor of, there's so many, on the multiple levels this is working. So it's the idea of labor, of the craftsman labor, but also of manual building construction labor, Black labor, but also and kind of bringing that into that kind of labor into the fine arts labor, the artist labor, where the bricks now also visually represent or refer back, to minimalism. Donald Judd, Carl Andre. So there's a lot to unpack here. I will not do it. Sorry. The next is tar. So when we see tar, again, this is also a multivalent. A lot of meanings are here. So when we see tar in Gates' work, this is a portrait of his father. His father was an entrepreneur. He owned a roofing business, and so I was so happy to see his father's tar kettle in the new museum. That was really exciting for me. And so when Gates uses tar, it's a portrait of his father. It's also relates to Black labor again. Tar is a preservative. He's preserving homes. His father was preserving homes. And so many times he'll cover objects that he either made or found, and he covers them with the tar. In this case, this is a fire hose. In this piece, Quiet Riot with Tar. Another visual trope that he uses is the fire hose, decommissioned fire hoses to commemorate and to point back to the 1963 hosing of civil rights protesters in Birmingham, Alabama. So he does a lot with fire hoses. And the last thing is the application of tar on objects and canvas brings blackness, nice, thick, heavy blackness into what is typically white spaces. This is a portrait of his mother. And when I've listened to enough interviews, and even last week, Lisa and I went to hear him at the New Museum. When folks ask him about his religious orientation or his spirituality, or are you a Christian, many times, all of a sudden, he'll start telling you a story about his mother. And that's exactly what he did on Thursday night. He talked about his mom when prayer was needed, like for instance, when 2 bills needed to be paid and there's no money, the gas bill and the electric bill had to be paid, she would go into the bathroom and she would pray. And so this floor here is the actual floor of his mother's prayer closet. And so I was like, yeah. And so it's interesting to me that whenever he is asked about his religious orientation, he always points back to his mother. For him, that is the base, the ground of his understanding of spirituality. It is the spiritual power and the spiritual labor that his mother exemplified and embodied. And so it's interesting, he kind of passes it off to his mother when he starts talking about it. Anyway, the other portrait, come on, there we go. The way that I look at the portraits of his sisters, Gates is the youngest of 9, the only male. And so he was raised in a household where they're, he was born in 73, so they're in the middle of Black social consciousness, of affirmative action, of all the social, he's in the middle of that, and he's witnessing that in his life. So when I think of the Black Madonna, which is again another trope that he uses, I always attributed this to that kind of social activism labor of his sisters. But I love this quote. I love this quote about the Black Madonna series that he's done. I was super interested in how powerful women in and around my life seem to be a solution that the world is never looking for. And I love this about Gates because most of his work is about leveraging and putting those folks up who are invisible and giving them that platform. So we got the artists, builders, craftsmen's labor. We've got his father's, that includes his father. We got the spiritual labor, and then we got the activist labor. So Gates, as a monk, let's say, activates all those kinds of labors in order to create in his role as a monk. And here's an actual quote from him about that role, that vocation. What if I were to say that I've underplayed the fact that I'm actually a Benedictine monk, and this work that that I have been doing, what you all call art, this is just a byproduct of a mandate from on high. Love that quote, because what he's kind of getting to is that, yeah, sure, I'm an artist. He finally admitted he was an artist at this lecture, but really, his call is higher than that. His call is not that this just happens to be the route for him to do the things that he needs to do. So one of the queries, one of the things that he's investigating throughout his work, here's another quote by Gates, is it possible to deal with the sacred in a way that simply lets there be space for the possibility of a sacred act or a sacred moment? And so a lot of his work, his strategies, that's what it's about, is trying to create, to be a receptacle for that. So for instance, you see this black line that's going across those two walls. That's actually a lineup of books. This piece is called A Walking Prayer. And on the spine are the titles of the books, but when you read them, you're actually praying. So now the viewer walks across and, reading this, now it becomes now shifts from viewer to participant, praying the titles now also, which are around the room, now engaging that room, shifting it from exhibition space to sacred place. Amen? He does this is so he's my soul tutor. He's my soul tutor. So here, what I want to go into next are a couple of characteristics of what a monk does and what I see happening in Gates' work, and kind of like what I want to be when I grow up, and if there are monks out there, if you all are monks, here's some things to to check off your boxes if you're doing. Affection. A monk always begins with affection, right? The things that we love. And so what a monk is doing is waking up our emotional intelligence that our society keeps on making us repress, right? Right? I mean, okay, well, that's a Q&A question. But here's a quote. I have an appetite for junk. I have an appetite for other people's problems. The word that pops out to me is the word appetite. I have passion. And that is the ground zero of what I do. And it doesn't go away. I don't stuff it behind when I speak about my art. I don't hide it. I mean, how many of you out there have gone through an MFA program? Like, you know, I've gone through an MFA program. Your spirituality is the last thing they want to hear about. Last thing. So, so Gates is just putting it out there. And for me, he's giving me permission to be all of Maria. That includes my pain, my joy, the things that I care about. He's allowing, I mean, I'm just going to tell this one story. This is going to make this go longer. But, you know, doing a PhD program really takes the life out of you. And I remember sitting in a, you know, in one of these seminar classes, you know, all the boys and me. And I guess we were talking about something that I was really passionate about, because all of a sudden I'm getting louder and really loud, and I'm getting really agitated, and I really get impassioned, and all of a sudden they're all like, you know, doing this, you know, my professor's getting kind of like really anxious, because we are asked in these spaces to put aside those things that actually are the things that activate us to being in those kind of spaces in the first place. And Gates is a model for saying, no way, no way. My father-in-law just passed away, and I'm bringing him up because outside of Gates, he's another model of how these things could happen. And I'm saying this to you because this is really the important thing that Gates is doing. What monkhood means, what we need to be doing, is allowing for that affection and that passion to come back into the public sphere. So my father-in-law is very renowned in this really small slice of academic life. He is a biblical textual critic, you know, does biblical textual criticism. Really small slice of life. But he's also an anomaly because he grew up as a charismatic from the Pentecostal tradition. So he when he's in academic life, when he's a professor, he doesn't leave the Pentecostal person that he grew up in revival meetings. He doesn't leave that behind. As he's doing the most driest technical biblical exegesis that I have ever had to like deal with, so technical, as he's parsing out, like a text, he meets the divine, and he starts crying. And so because of his death, we are getting all these posts and all these texts, from former students saying, "Oh, Dr. Fee, I remember when he just started, tears are coming down as he's like, deconstructing a sentence." And that's an example where we don't have to leave that behind. We don't leave the spiritual behind. Okay, sorry, I did my Maria preaching thing. And so how does Gates do this? He allows for entrance. He allows us to enter into that life of the Spirit by creating actual spaces, like in this piece called Sanctum, which he created this little chapel in the middle of the burnout remains of Bristol Temple in Bristol, England. But he just doesn't make that. He programs 522 hours of sound programming so that the people of Bristol could hear each other and have an encounter with one another. So these are the sacred spaces that he's setting up. And I have to say, okay, no. I won't say that. More spaces. But interestingly enough, what you see here, the black bricks. This last piece is his latest piece this summer. His dad died in May. So I see this almost as a tomb, in a sense, but it's again covered in the black tar, and so it's a place that honors his dad. Another way he kind of creates these sacred moments is through the Black Monks of Mississippi, his music ensemble. So he'll create the spaces, and then they'll come in and sing. Or sometimes he'll go to spaces and they'll come in, and just by their presence and their gestures in that place shifts how you perceive that place and the things that are in that place. Okay, that is spiritual work. Assurance. This is a little bit a more lengthy explanation. So Gates allows us to enter into these, he kind of massages our empathetic muscles, but then he shifts the viewer from viewer to performer, or be a part of the performance. And so what I'm gonna, so for him, I love this quote, I was needing the object to get back to the ritual. In other words, I make art, but what I really care about is what's happening while I'm making the art. And so what I'm going to talk about now are what happens what's the mechanics, what's happening when we make art and experience art. And I'm going to do this through his 2010 exhibition called To Speculate Darkly, that was at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And it surrounds the artist, the potter. It surrounds the antebellum enslaved artist Dave Drake. Now we know of Dave Drake because he was one of the few potters in the South who was literate. And so he would sign this piece is, by the way, in the museum. He would sign his pieces, Dave Drake, on them, and he would come up with these poetic couplets that he would inscribe on the clay in the pot. So that's how we know that Dave Drake existed. So Gates is asking us to, in the exhibition, asking us to speculate darkly about who gets known and who doesn't. That's one of the things that he's dealing with. But it's also the opportunity for him to collaborate with a whole bunch of people so that they too could have the experience of creating something and then experiencing these, I put it out through these three qualities of, and by doing so, gains self-possession, resistance and resilience, and monumental place. Okay, so Gates has a collaboration with Kohler Residency, and he creates these ceramic sinks. Kohler is the maker of, bathroom things. So they have an artist residency, and so he created these sinks. Then he also has a collaboration with Leroy Bach of Wilco fame to take the couplets that are on Dave Drake's vases or pots, and then create My Name is Dave, a hymnal. And then he has performers come in and videotape and perform those musicals. And then he invites church choirs from around the area of the art museum to come in and also intone those couplets. So here's a couplet. So Karl Rahner talks about how we as people, we project a set of symbols outside of ourselves. And he's talking, in a sense, about liturgy and ritual. But here, we're going to substitute that and also include the poetic. Like Dave Drake makes pots for people to use, but he also makes his own pots. He makes all these set of symbols outside of himself so that they can reflect back to him, and he can have self-subjectivity. He can be a human being. He sees that he can do this, especially in an inhumane and dehumanizing situation. So that's self-possession. So art allows for us too. I mean, if you're artists out here, you can say amen. Amen? Hello? I know there are artists there. So the other thing that art does is it allows for resistance and resilience. Art denies that dehumanizing factor. It denies it, because the minute that we accomplish something, there's physical evidence that we matter. But it also adds resilience. When we're doing the repetition, when we're doing the ritual, it gives us what I call an epistemology of the hand. There's wisdom and acuity that comes from doing something over and over again. It teaches us how to be fluid, how to adapt. It teaches us about materials. And then we could take that wisdom and we take that skill and we transfer it into other areas of our lives. And so it allows us to be resilience. These are really important things right now. You people who are artists, we need you because we need to learn these things and experience them. Not head knowledge, soul knowledge. Okay, and the other thing that Ronner says is, okay, so there's a set of symbols that are outside yourselves that gives self-possession, but it also projects a figure, an actual figure, what I call a monumental place that others could either accept or deny. But there's something now physically from you that represents you out there in the world. Okay, so these are ways that Gates, as a monk, provides the perimeters and the strategies for us to go through all this process. Okay, and then the last thing is, of course, I hear the alarm. The last thing is, of course, as we go through all that, we now have agency as human beings. We now know that we can, with very little, we can do a lot. So I love this visual thought that Gates has. It's from the 12 Ballads of Huguenot House, the book. And going back to this idea of affection, we begin with affection, but it's the affection that leads us to the labor. And when we have that, what we're doing is we're validating. We're adding validation to those things that we are concentrating on and our commitment. Okay. I think I want to end there because I'd rather just unpack a lot of the stuff that I just threw out at you through the Q&A. Even Soul Pavilion, which is a series of dinners that he had in the Archives House in Dorchester. And let's just talk now and have a conversation. I'd love to hear your response and your questions, as well as this conversation that I'm now going to have with Lisa and Tyler, right? I also wanted to sit down. Oh my gosh.
Thank you for. Hello. Thank you, Maria, for that very passionate and insightful sharing you just performed for us from your heart. I seem to have lost my notes somewhere in the shuffle, so I'm just going to wing it. I suppose, there's always talk about artists being, having the role of the trickster, and this trickster, shows up from Plato's philosophy to across Native American and in the Sufi tradition, Maulana Nasruddin is this character that basically is, parading in this very sort of like witty manners to kind of depart various like nonsense in order to get to the sense. And in a way, I feel like the art world seemed to think that also belongs to them. And it's this idea of the trickster, the artist as the ironic, has been, co-opted as a kind of a contemporary modern, activity of the artist when that has been actually the act of it that belongs to any kind of insightful way of approaching life in order to get to truth somehow. So I guess my question is, how much of a trickster is Theaster Gates? And he has mentioned himself that in the beginning he had to play by the rules and or of the art world, or he played with those rules, which told him to, don't take things too seriously. Insincerity was almost like the thing to do if you wanted to be someone that became visible. So I have I guess the question I have is Theaster sincere when he's playing the role of the insincere?
He's the monk. Yes and no. So he'll say he's a trickster because what he wants to do is lure you in with beauty, with the aesthetics, with what he's doing. And then while you're in there, you adopt a commitment to what he cares about. So yes, he's going to trick you into that. But he's also, like you said, different cultures has the trickster, and so that is also true of Black culture with the Brer Rabbit and the Spider Anansi, and also in early Black theater, the trickster dealt with role reversal. And so, to your point, to get to the truth of really who is the wise one, and so that is a tradition that he is actually working in. But he will talk. But he does talk about. He says exactly like the art world will only accept religion or shamanistic things only if it's done, tongue in cheek. And what he's really after is he actually calls that a bias of the West. And what he's really after is to regain the sincerity, the intuition, those things that we put aside that don't have merit. He says, that's what he wants to bring back.
Just following up on that, I thought I would just ask about the idea of the change you were talking about that he is trying to effect in his work. I think we think a lot, particularly in a secular context, about political change, social change, activism of that sort. I'm wondering how you would characterize this idea of creating spiritual change. If you could just say a little bit more about the spiritual effects that his community projects and his engagement has, not only on the collective, but on the individual.
I guess I want to say that it's not spiritual change, it's the spirit that changes us. And so, maybe you have to...
You had said to me something about love. Maybe that could help.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I'm trying to ask the question again so it gives me time to think about this.
Well,
answer this question.
Right. I guess what I was saying is we're used to talking a lot about socio-political change, and that's one lens that you can view Gates's work through. But then there's also this area that's a little bit more difficult to talk about, which is what are the kind of spiritual changes that his work enacts. And that's, I think, also one of the hopes that we have in talking here is like trying to help find a different language to talk about this more unfamiliar area.
And I think my answer to that is let's go back to the Black church. They had to, in the beginning, post Reconstruction era, the Black church operated as everything. It was the social, it was the political, it was the religious, it was the economical, it was the entertainment. It had to be everything for the community. And so I guess it's hard for us because we parse everything and we fragment everything. And so Gates is coming from the Black church, where, he studied urban planning because he wanted to do community development. Community development starts at the Black church. It doesn't separate its spirituality from what it's doing in the world. It doesn't do that. I mean, I don't think it does. It's a part, what we call a partial differentiation. It's the same in the Latino community. We don't have a special ministry diaconate because we're familia. We take care of one another, and so we're doing the same thing, but we don't separate them into these different categories. And so that's how I think I would answer that question: is that they're not separated for him. When he's doing social justice, when he's taking care of his neighborhood, that is a spiritual act. That's how I'm reading it, and that's how I'm reading, my forays into the Black church and its history and some of the history behind that. That's how I'm reading it. Does that make sense for you guys? Yeah.
It does. Do you have another question, John?
Oh, sure. Do I? Yes. Well, I'm also interested in just thinking also psychologically about different ways of viewing the role of the artist. There's the idea of the artist as a kind of independent maker, the creator, and then there's the artist as a kind of seeker or follower of a path. And I was thinking about this specifically. I was watching a YouTube talk that Theaster Gates gave, and he said he sings this song to himself every night: "Guide my hands while I'm on this tedious journey. Guide my hands, guide my hands." This is sort of his mantra every evening, he was saying. It seems to be a different way of thinking about the role of the artist, and I'm wondering how you see that sort of playing out in his work.
Yeah, because what he's kind of doing there is that he's recognizing that he's just a conduit. It's not his work. I asked him when I had the opportunity to speak to him, I go, how do you, where do you get this hope, to do the things that you're doing? He's like, oh, I don't count on hope because hope will burn you out. It just will. You just can't trust in hope. But I'm gonna do the thing that's put in front of me. I'm gonna do that, and when that's done, I'm gonna do the next thing, and I'm gonna do the next. So this is why, for me, labor is really important, because that is the way you do the thing that the possibilities are there through the labor. Again, the love propels the labor, but it is you can't worry about getting burned out because it's going to happen. But if you're faithful to the labor, hopefully something will happen. And I, when I look over what he's doing, I certainly see that. I think again to his mother and her spirituality, and that idea of the prayer closet is pretty much how he goes about life. Is first the faith part of believing that it's something bigger and beyond us. I don't know. I think it's, to me, that has impressed me greatly.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that. I was also present last Thursday when Theaster was speaking at the New Museum, and when he was asked, "Are you religious?" He said, "Absolutely." And then he talked about his mother praying, and he said, when I saw what she would come out of there, and not only the two things she asked for got answered, but there was something extra that came out of it that was left over that could be given to someone else. I was like, I want to be able to do that. So when my friends call me and say, "Can you bless this?" or "Can you do this thing that you do? Can you please pray for this thing for me?" I'm going to do it, and I find even the way that he speaks about this, that the permission that he's managed to give himself, this definitely goes back to his exposure to not only his family, his father and mother, but also the church and the him being part of the choir, the music. Music is a very big part of his practice. I mean, he answered many of his questions singing hymns for us. Just breaking into a hymn, and there's, plenty of crosses everywhere you see in his work, and he acknowledged that is a symbol of a capacity that he wants to invoke, and that that capacity is faith. And in his advice to young people, many asked for it, was that the number one way for you to go for it is first to learn how to work with your hands and just repeat, do, and believe. The other word was believe. And so I think that that's absolutely beautiful for an artist to have that kind of an awareness. And what comes to my mind is how can we, your proposition is for the world to look at Gates's work as an example of how to do community work, which is all-encompassing. It encompasses the spiritual, the psychological arena, doesn't leave any part of us behind. I do wonder, though, whether we are acknowledging the source where that came for him. Where did that come from for him, and what can artists learn from communities, spiritual communities, religious institutions, and practices that have been around for, traditionally for centuries on, for the entire time being, and the disconnect, that has happened, where we're speaking about art as the savior. How can we inspire the possibility also for us, for artists, to learn from the traditions? Because I think that's the one thing that maybe Gates is on to, and has had the permission somehow, and allows himself to even speak publicly, that many artists are unable to because of the repression that you were talking about. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think is the possibility for that flipping, that exchange possibility?
Well, the first thing is we think of art as this individualistic expression. We're very individualistic in this society, and so even in our theology, Protestant theology that I've studied, it's all about my own personal faith. It's all about my own, my will to be moral, blah blah blah. And so I think what the Black Church, what other non-Western traditions and cultures bring in is a different cosmology, the way that they see the world. Different from the one that I inherited here, is that the world, the divine order is interconnected, and you can't separate that. And so, so that kind of gets filtered into the Black Church, and so and in Black communities, that is you can't be you. You are somebody's son, daughter. And you can't even be, anything that you do always has to have this collective expression. You're not fully full until you share that, or you are informed by. Sunday dinner is a place where the stranger now is kin. It's the place that reunites all of us. I'm trying to think of it. Cooking, dinner is the place where we confess with our aunties the crap that is going. It's church. And so we, being a Protestant, we don't think that way. We don't act that way, and we don't even, those things are happening, but we don't acknowledge them. But that's different in other cultures where the collective identity, it's a collective identity. And so I think that's what Gates is bringing to the table, is that he, when he was talking about his music ensemble and they started singing on Thursday, two or three of them grew up all in the Black church. They all know the same songs. They don't really have to practice. When they start, singing, they are all there at the same place because they have the same history and experiences, which is a collective experience. And so they are all on that same wavelength. And I find that, that is the way, actually, we do all operate, but we kind of ignore that. We kind of ignore that.
Well, I thought we would open it up to questions.
Oh, there
I'm
goes a
sure
hand.
some people have some, so we'll have a mic around.
Is that working?
Thank you, Maria, and this is so great. I'm curious about Gates's integrative work, the way that you're describing this collective value throughout his work, and so many layers and dimensions that transcend the individual. How does that affect questions of authorship, ownership of a work? Like, his name is attached to even the examples that we've seen on the screen. Mm-hmm. How does he think about that?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think he did talk about this a little bit in the talk on Thursday, where if you go see the show, he's actually visually quoting a lot of people. So yeah, his name is there, but the materials he's using, the shapes they are, the titles, what he's doing is actually doing a lot of quoting of the people that has shaped and informed him.
Well,
so
he owns the work.
Yeah.
He owns most of the work that is in his show. He's a collector as well, so he collects other artists' works as well.
Yes, and that's in the new museum too. But he does talk about it in the term of having a conversation. That these are bell hooks is in the show with her bell that he gave her. So yes.
Any other questions?
Thank you for this presentation. I really felt your passion, and not only your interest in his work, but your love for his work, and how he embodies qualities that he holds important. I particularly loved the quote where he said something like, in being a Benedictine monk, this thing that you all call art, I'm just allowing. We can call it that, but really, I'm here doing what I see as important, what has meaning for me, and allowing that to come through, and allowing it to be called art. And for some reason, I see that as particularly profound, that he seems to have this kind of idea or this connection to life, connection to the divine, connection to God, and he wants to fit that somehow into our society, our definitions, and he's sort of very cleverly found a way to sort of do that and really do what he really wants to do, and call it, and we can call it what we like to call it. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that aspect.
Yeah, he has a quote that says, art is not what I lead with belief. I believe in people, I believe in places, I believe in material things. So those become my chapter headings in the book that will be coming out. So he's operating on the bigger thing, and art just happens to be the dialogue or the conduit to talk about these other things that he believes in. I mean, one of the questions that my friends were like, you have to talk about this tomorrow, is like, why did you pick Theaster Gates, right? Why did you pick Theaster Gates as my dissertation topic? You know, growing up, I grew up here in New York City. You know, Gates grew up in an urban setting. And the thing, when I started reading about the Dorchester Project, I'm like, this is a man who loves place. Not that many people, most of us just go through not noticing and paying attention to locality and what it does to us. And he does. He would see these buildings fall apart and move, you know, or be neglected. And he was he came at it like a preacher, like you know, trying to save these buildings. And that to me spoke to me as someone who's lived in Queens and seeing the potentiality of places and things. But he goes further and finds a way of rescuing them. So that's the thing that I love about him. The other thing that I love about him is that he, you know, puts the issue of race right there on the table. And in him doing so creates a pathway for me to talk about it and for me to explore that, you know. And so that's another reason why I fell. So it's not just art. I love art, but it's art became the pathway for me to investigate me and where I came from and my experiences in the world as you know, as I kind of present as white, but you know, as a Latina, right? And then the third thing was, as an artist, he creates these things that are awesome and beautiful. So even though there's this spirituality attached to it, or there's this religious or faith part of it, the aesthetic is not compromised. It's not compromised, you know, because you know the art for art's sake thing is that it's, you know, by attaching art to any spirituality or religious thing, I mean, it does a lot of things, but you know, one of the things is that it compromises the faith, the art itself, and what it can say. And for Gates, it's like, nuh-uh, those things are not mutual exclusives. You know, it is a thing in and of itself. You know, it's bowling alley floors. It's, you know, it's black tar. It's this, and it's doing these things. So I love that he's able to balance that. That didn't really answer your question, but.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you, Maria. So this is like an observation / question. Something that I realized about him as, you speak about him as artist and also like monk, and he seems to kind of master this, or I shouldn't say master, he seems to like lead with like what's in front of him, like you were saying. So, you know, he's refurbishing buildings and he's bringing new life to buildings, and then he's doing, you know, art, working with his, you know, things in front of him, hands, he's doing performance art. So like all this multimodal stuff, like meals, everything's like very multimodal, I guess, which I find so interesting. And like, if you put it against like the art world, which often is all about like mastery, right, of a single mode and doing it like the best and well. But it seems to me that almost seems like the not spiritual way to approach art, right? To like master one thing and one thing only, so that you're kind of at the precipice of a thing. And he does this thing where he encounters everything in his community and his life, and he makes it art. And so I just find that so like fascinating, because you know, no knocking people who are like masters at like, you know, great, amazing forms, but it just seems like that is the role of an artist when they're informed by something greater, right, is that you take everything in front of you and you kind of, as a channel, you respond to it and say, I'm a channel, to like revive this building. I'm a channel to see this fire hose as something more. And your presentation made me think about this and realize this. So I just wanted to share that. And I wonder if you want to talk about that, because he just feels like artist to me, like a spiritual artist. But when you put it against someone that is just mastering a very small thing, like I said, that's very beautiful and impressive in its own way. But I'm wondering if you can speak on that kind of a bit.
Lisa has the mic. Did you want to say something? Oh.
Did you have a response?
I guess, yes, I think that's why it is soul training, because it trains us to be attentive, right? And that we can find God and the divine and ourselves and our neighbors through, sweeping the street, and bringing that rhythm and that pattern and that ritual and bringing that into the fine arts sphere and saying, this is just as valuable. But he's also, coming to your point about the technicality and knowing one thing. That's also shifting in the art world. But you're right, like we think of it as mastering that. He wants to just, so. Yes, so thank you. I think he does teach us how to be attentive to the rhythms that we do and the patterns, and that these rituals are part of what brings us closer to God and one another. So I think that's it. Yeah? Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Go to the show.
We can enjoy and talk about this over some more tea and some food and wine. Please join us and feel free to converse with each other, with us. Please stay tuned and make sure that you sign up if you, for some reason, came here today as a guest of someone else or not connected to us directly, so that we can be in touch. Absolutely go see the exhibition. It will really show you and teach you so much and have you feel a lot, because that's what Theaster said, art to him is feeling. So in that note, thank you so much for being a part of our first Inspired Brunch series here in New York City, and we hope to welcome you for future programming, and we hope that this program has warmed your heart and also expose you to some phenomenal artworks and artists and initiatives out there. And I will just say one thing. Theaster is just one example of a huge number of incredible artists out there. And we chose him because he happened to have a very clear sense of the sense of his spiritual work, and is very open about it. But there are a lot of incredible artists out there whose work are absolutely in a similar light, create a lot of light, and they are beginning to express it, and they have their own language of expressing what it means to them, and it's their right and prerogative, and the same way as it is our prerogative to allow ourselves to have a reading of their work, which is public, and it is for us to enjoy. So thank you so much. Thank you, Maria, for your incredible presentation.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great night.
Did you